Over the last year, I've been experimenting with BFR cuffs, blood flow restriction, and specifically to augment or improve certain physiological characteristics for me as a competitive CrossFit athlete. And today, I want to share those things with you. I've been trying to figure out how to do this the best I possibly can. So basically what it comes down to is that I'm not the expert. And if I'm not the expert, I should probably bring somebody on who is.
So the way I look at it is if I can integrate BFR at...
This video is part 2. Be sure to check out part 1 where Kyle breaks down what BFR is and how it works.
Here's what I would do. I think my first session would be reverse bands. So we would go on a cycle where the first week you build to a max effort triple reverse band high bar back squat with tiny little bands, the little Rogue orange bands. Then the next week we'd use those same bands, but you'd go to a max effort double, and the next week to a single, and then you do a deload week. Then the next cycle through that, you go to the Rogue red bands and you go all the way through it. Then you go to the Rogue blue bands, you go all the way through it, go to the Rogue green bands, you go all the way through it, then a green plus an orange. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so you go through 20 weeks of that, and you get really, really, really strong just from doing that. But there would be a part B to that session. Part B would be a really basic 5-3-1 front squat. So you go, week 1 would be 5-5, 5+, which is like a max effort set at 75%. And then the next week would be 3-3-3 up to a top set at 80%. The last set of 3 is a max rep set, and then 5-3-1, the last set being max rep set. So that would be your Monday. For you, might put some BFR step ups after that, just as a little, like a finisher. Like a lot of people talk about finishers, even though I tend to try to use a lot of science application and training, I have found the finisher to be a really good hypertrophy augmenter. And so you'd probably finish with like some max effort, max rep step ups using a similar protocol that I talked about for the front squats. Then your second big squatty session would probably be on Friday. Be a little more dynamic. You do some, squat clean front squat complexes, finishing with say probably 80% of your squat clean 1RM, and then just as many front squats as you could hit after that. And then we would go into that BFR front squat protocol that I talked about earlier, the 10-10-10, where the last set of 10 isn't really 10, it's as many as you can do. Super painful. So those would be your 2 big sessions. And then I would make sure to include some assistance work there. You'd probably do Nordics, some Nordic hamstring curls there, probably some RDLs, stuff to keep the whole hip and knee healthy. Barbell hip thrust would be stuck in there as well. And I might actually BFR the barbell hip thrust depending on how mean I was feeling at the time. But yeah, that would be the squat protocol. A squat protocol like that, I've seen over 16 weeks, I've seen people add 20 to 30 pounds to their 1RM back squat, and same for their 1RM front squat, males and females. I'm going to cheat because this is actually a protocol I've used for myself. It's just 1 session a week was all that was really needed for it. And it's so simple. It's you do an AMRAP minus 1 set. So it's just as many reps as you possibly can, leaving 1 rep in reserve or 1 rep in the tank. You do that every 90 seconds. And I start with 5 sets. And then for the remaining time, you get on I used an assault bike because that was the only bike I had at the time, but jump on a bike. So basically something to pull the blood out of your arms and back into your legs. So you're pumping all the blood into your arms, then you're going to pull it all out. Then you're pumping all the blood back in your arms or in the handstand push-ups, and you pull it out on the bike. Now, the caveat here is that we're doing this with BFR. So the cuffs are at 70%. So basically, as you progress through the 5 sets, you're getting to the point that your arms are they've doubled in size because they're, right? We've kinked that hose and blood's getting in there, but it's not coming out. It's just one of the most effective little tools that I've used for it. And what I'll do is, first week, 5 sets, second week, 6, third week, 7, 8, 9, so on and so forth. So definitely one of those things that it's progressive and extremely painful as usual. And then I usually did some assistance work afterward. I love using the rope attachment, overhead tricep extensions. There's our finish. So I'm doing rope attachment, overhead tricep extensions as my finisher for a protocol like that. But I only do that once a week because I found with upper body BFR work, it is way more taxing than lower body BFR work. So that one session will leave you sore and like with performance decrements in pressing for like 4 days afterward. So I would usually schedule that on a Wednesday before Thursday rest day. So you get a full day of rest. And then I would go no upper body on Friday and then start to touch upper body again on Saturday. I've done similar things with like dip variations with BFR. It's hard with dip variations because if you're doing them on the rings, then, it rubs on the cuff. Yep. But doing, bar dip, parallel bar dip work with that and then trying to get that to translate over to ring muscle ups has been a fantastic tool. But I've also tried to do muscle ups 2 days later and like I'm failing the dip on rep 7. So like that's what I'm getting at is like the fatigue accumulation from doing that in the upper body is just way more severe than the fatigue accumulation in the legs. It might be a CrossFitter problem, right? Like we all do so much squatting and so much lower body volume that we're super resilient in the legs and maybe less so in the upper body. Or maybe that's a me problem. I'm not sure. But yeah, those would be my big protocols for improving either one of those things.
Yeah. And like you kind of said this before, like this isn't for beginners because it's going to limit the amount of exposure you can get to other things like you're saying. Like if you're really messed up from it and you're kind of doing like the handstands, push-ups are specific, but you might be doing accessories that obviously aren't like sport movements, then it's like you're losing opportunities to work on sport development, which is fine for somebody like you who's been competing since 2011 or whatever. But for somebody who's new, like you wouldn't go to that right away.
No, definitely not. That would be like the last. That's the last step in the progression. Well, maybe not the last step, but it's like late in the progression series. Like if someone who was, let's say, 3 years into training used that squat protocol that I gave you, first off, diminishing returns. Like you're already using the most advanced protocols when you should be doing a hatch cycle and figuring out how your body responds to a hatch, or God forbid, German volume training, like get some squat every day protocols. But like for real, they should experiment. I did all that stuff. I messed around with all that and figured out that it wasn't for me. But like in reality, some of those things need to be done. Like if you are a novice trainee and you're jumping straight to some of these protocols, then you're missing the forest for the trees here.
Anything that you feel like I missed or like things that you want to add?
The safety aspects, BFR raises blood pressure pretty dramatically in the moment. So anybody who has any sort of, pre-existing cardiac issues, BFR is definitely a no-go for them. People who've had strokes and things like that, like that's a huge counterindication for BFR. But with all that being said, the reason I want to bring that up is in general, it's a relatively safe training tool. I just think that a lot of people, they go in and they want to use BFR thinking that it's a shortcut to, getting jacked or a shortcut to building, massive endurance. And the reality is you've played around with it enough to know it is the most painful training stimulus that I think you can come up with. There really isn't anything else that compares with it. So, I think if you want to investigate BFR, if that's something you want to dig into, just keep in mind that it's just as hard and just as much work. It might make things happen faster, but it's just as hard and just as much work as, traditional training. It's not better than it. It's not anything like that. It's just another avenue for achieving a similar goal and maybe just a little bit faster. But to get there faster, you have to go through a lot of pain.
That's funny because that's one of the things that like one of the follow-up responses I get once I try to explain it to people initially is like, oh, so like it's sort of like cheating. Like you do it and tell me if it feels like cheating.
Yeah. There's very few things that can make high-level CrossFitters throw up, but some of those BFR squat protocols are them.
Yeah, gross. Big shout out. Thank you to Kyle Ruth for coming on and being willing to share his knowledge that he has with people for free. If you're someone who really enjoyed that, just realize that is part of a podcast. We actually stole all the clips for these 2 videos in this series from that podcast. So if you want more from Kyle I will link to that. Be sure to check that podcast out, and it will reiterate a lot of the things that you will hear them again from the things in this video. So that'll be helpful context and conversation. Be sure to check out Kyle's education that he's putting out through Training Think Tank. Great organization. Really value what they bring to the community. Thanks for watching.